You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. Good Monday morning. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. Okay, so it's been about a week since I last recorded a episode of the Spot Up Pod, and the San Antonio Spurs have completed some regular season games. So the Spurs have completed 2 games so far to begin the season. They played on Thursday in Dallas, where they lost by 11 points. I'll get into that game in a bit. And then they played on Saturday in San Antonio for their home opener, and they defeated the Houston Rockets in that game by 3 points. So let's go ahead and dive into a quick cap of these 2 regular season games to begin the season for San Antonio. So let's first go back to Dallas. So on Thursday, the Spurs are opening the season at Dallas. This game was pretty close in the first half. The Spurs basically kept like a 2-point lead at the final 3 minutes of the first quarter and the second quarter, and then they went into halftime with the 2-point lead. But then things kind of got away from them in the second half. Dallas put a lot more ball pressure on them, especially inbounding the ball. And Luka was a little bit rusty. I mean, he didn't play in any preseason games, but then he kind of got it going there in the second half. And so Dallas did build a 14-point lead in the third quarter against the Spurs at one point, and I think Dallas led by 7 at the end of the third. And then from there, it was the fourth that the game really got away from San Antonio, where, the Spurs just started sending 2 players toward the ball, against like Luka, against Kyrie, and they really had a tough time with their communication and kind of rotations. And so the Mavs were getting, good 3-point looks out there on the arc, especially Klay Thompson, one of the new additions to Dallas. And so basically the lead really ballooned, and the Spurs started turning it over as well in the second half. And so basically Dallas led by as many as 21 points in this game in the fourth quarter. And so by the 6-minute mark, Coach Pop basically, said that was it for the night for the starters. And so he pulled out all of the starters at the 6-minute mark, and basically the bench players played the remainder of the game. And the Spurs, the bench players actually fought back a little bit. They got it to just an 11-point loss, but still, we knew that game was pretty much over in the second half. So the Spurs showed that against Dallas, at least in the first game, they had some trouble there in Dallas. And again, who is it? One of the players said that it was Chris Paul, I believe. Chris Paul mentioned, that was, early, at least the fact that the Spurs fought early in that game, that was pretty good for them, considering that Dallas is the defending Western Conference champion that went to the finals last year. So that was something that Paul mentioned. But of course, the wheels kind of came off there in the second half, where the Spurs again had difficulty rebounding, also getting out and closing out on Dallas's shooters, and just not letting, Dallas was getting some pretty good looks out there. And then plus on the Spurs' end, they also had difficulty shooting the three, whether it was contested or wide open. They had a pretty low 3-point percentage as a team. But then the first win of the season came in in San Antonio, where the Spurs defeated the Rockets by 3 points. So let's go through a quick recap of this game. So in the first quarter, it was relatively close. The Spurs did lead by 7, so just a little bit of a cushion against Houston there. They were playing a more up-tempo type of offense, both teams, and both teams were just trying to out-duel each other from the 3-point line. But then in the second quarter is where the game got away from Houston. The Spurs played some major defense here in the second quarter, where they held the Rockets to over 9 minutes without a field goal, without any points, actually not even a free throw attempt. And so Houston went 9 straight minutes without scoring. The Spurs went on an 18-0 run during this period, during this time frame, and they actually led by as many as 22 points in this game, which is now their season high in points, I guess. I mean, it's only been 2 games. But the Spurs' defense, I mean, just overall for the quarter, they held the Rockets to just 10 points in that quarter. And then the Spurs did a great job here in this one, whether it was some of the starters mixed in with like players on the bench. They were just like on a string defensively, collapsing whenever the Rockets trying to take the ball inside, then rotating out. Just kind of a lot of the opposite of what happened against Dallas. The Spurs did a great job where Houston was either forced to take contested looks, near the paint, or they were having to settle for like mid-range or like 3-point jumpers that were heavily contested. And so that was just, that could be a sign potentially of what the Spurs' defense can be capable of at different points this season. And so they obviously showed that there in that second quarter, where Houston scored just 10 points. And so the Spurs, looked comfortable going into halftime. They led by as many as 21 points going into halftime. But then the third quarter came. The Rockets fought back a little bit. They got it down to, I believe, 13, but then the Spurs kind of picked their lead back up. Wemby had a pretty good closing to the third quarter, and the Spurs led by 18 points after 3. And then the fourth quarter came, and the Rockets did something schematically that I wrote about on the Spot Up Shot, where For the first 3 quarters of the game, the Spurs were kind of mixing in their drop, the way they guarded the pick and roll coverage on the Rockets, where a lot of Houston shooters, they like to, when whoever big sets the screen, whether it's like Alperen Şengün or Jabari Smith Jr., then if the defense plays drop defense, the bigs, then the Rockets have a bunch of shooters who can just step up and shoot. And so that was the case for like Dylan Brooks, for Jalen Green, for Fred VanVleet. They love those pull up threes when the defense plays drop defense on them. So early on, the Spurs in the first quarter were playing a lot of drop defense with Wemby and Zach Collins, and then Coach Pop kind of made an adjustment where he threw in some more what I would call hedge and recover, where Zach or Wemby kind of shades out to that ball handler when the screen's initially set, then they kind of recover back to their man who's on the roll, like Şengün or Jock Landale. And so the Spurs were kind of throwing that in, or sometimes the bigs would just completely switch. A player like Wemby and Sochan, they are able to switch, easily out there on the perimeter. So they would just take over, guarding a guard. And so again, for the first 3 quarters, the Spurs were doing this to try to manage the Rockets' pick and roll attack, especially with those shooters wanting to come off and shoot threes or try to get to the rim, such as a case like a player for like Jalen Green. But then in the fourth quarter, Stephon Castle was playing really good defense on Green and the Rockets' ball handlers. And so the Rockets, it showed that, they really wanted to get Castle off the ball there in the fourth. So they went to a new scheme. They actually started going guard to guard screening. This is something Castle mentioned after the game. And so what was happening here was that Jalen Green was the player mainly attacking the Spurs' defense inside. And Green, once Green was able to have a guard set a screen for him, he was able to get Castle off from guarding him. And from there, he was either able to take Chris Paul off the dribble or Harrison Barnes or like Julian Champagnie. And so this just shows like a level of respect that Castle, a rookie in just his second NBA game, he's already getting the opposing offense to try to get him off the ball. They don't want him guarding their best ball handler or initiator out there. And so that just showed, a sign of respect for Castle that the Rockets were trying to do this schematically. And so this actually worked. Houston was able to get into the paint, get some better 3-point looks in the fourth quarter. And they actually got the Spurs' lead all the way down to 1. The game did go down to crunch time, but in crunch time, the Spurs did a better job here of at least making their free throws. They went 9 of 10 from the free throw line in that final 5 minutes. Chris Paul had a really good play with 8 seconds left on the shot clock on a possession where he cut in inside and found Jeremy Sochan cutting for a layup. And then the Spurs did something a little bit different now because of those guard to guard swings where they were getting Castle, off the ball. What they did was they put Sochan on Green and they put Wemby on Dylan Brooks and Castle on Fred VanVleet. So now VanVleet was completely out of the action where, they didn't want Castle involved at all. So VanVleet wouldn't set the screen no more. But now when Brooks would come up to switch, we would screen for Green. Now all of a sudden it was Wemby or Sochan kind of trying to collapse. And it pretty much worked out for the Spurs. It was a little bit of a gamble because on one time they did stop, Dylan Brooks missed a wide open 3, but then on another time he did make a wide open 3. But overall, the Spurs did hold on there in that final crunch time period to win the game by 3 points. So again, it was a gutsy win for San Antonio, despite them leading by 22 points. This is probably a game where maybe they would have lost, a year ago had they not had some veteran players like Chris Paul, like Harrison Barnes. I know Barnes really wasn't out there until they started having to shoot free throws. But again, just the fact that they kind of calmed down, they got into their sets, and they got fouled, they made their free throws, they really stepped up there, and they came away with the win. So again, they're going to play now Houston on Monday. So we'll see if they can win 2 in a row against Houston, or if the Rockets get some revenge. So that was just a quick recap of their games against Dallas and Houston. 1-1 now to begin the season. So where I want to go from here is I have some little index cards if you're watching a video. So what I have is I'm going to talk about some specific players that I just wrote some notes on. Again, I'm just going to give very basic observations because it's just been 2 games. I don't want to go too much into like stats and stuff because it's only 2 games. And then from there, I'm going to talk about some of the other players in the rotation, but I don't know who I'm going to talk about because I'm just going to basically flip the card and whoever I pick up, that's what I talk about. So let's just first focus on the players that I want to focus on first. The first player, let's start with the starters, is Wemby. So in Dallas, we kind of expected this. The message was that because he only got to play in 2 preseason games, he was probably going to be a little bit rusty out there in his first game back. And so he basically was, there in Dallas, where he scores 17 points on 18 shot attempts. He goes 1 of 8 from the free throw line, 6 of 6 from the free throw line, and then 9 rebounds and 4 turnovers. So this was to be expected. I mean, like I said, Victor had only played in 2 preseason games, and not even really the full games. He only played basically in the first half of those games. He really hadn't played, competitive basketball since the Paris Olympics in what was it, early September or late August, somewhere around there. I forgot the exact dates, or early July. Anyway, So this is kind of to be expected. Like I said, he was basically his 3-point shots, that he wasn't really in a rhythm. And he talked about after the game how he basically said, if he doesn't feel like he's in a rhythm, it's going to be hard for him to kind of become more accurate with his shots. So that kind of showed there. He looked a little bit, tired out there at different times. Also, just with those 4 turnovers, especially. I mean, just didn't look like he was ready for the game speed. And then the fact that the Spurs fell behind by over 20 points, it did look like, at that point when you're down by a lot of points, you just start settling for threes, and that's kind of just what it looked like from Wemby. Again, very tired. He had said after the game, his conditioning wasn't quite there yet, but he thought maybe 1 or 2 games he would get back to where his normal conditioning level. And it showed. I mean, he only took basically that Dallas game to get back there. So against Houston, he had a much better game here. Victor, he scores 29 points and 17 shot attempts, much better about, trying to get attempts closer to the rim. And also the Spurs, his teammates set him up there as well, very well. He had a lot of paint points where he had a play where he was basically posted up one of the Houston defenders. Then he used a pump fake and dunked it on two different players. Twice, Chris Paul found him on the break for some alley-oop attempts. And so Victor did a much better job just kind of getting a lot more of his shot attempts near the rim. From the 3-point line, he was much more in a rhythm. I mean, like he said against Dallas, that he has to feel like he's kind of in that rhythm in order to have like a good shooting night. And sure enough, he was definitely in a rhythm, because his first 3 was a 29-foot logo 3 where his foot was still on the Spurs' half-court logo, and he made that shot when Dillon Brooks kind of gave him some space. Then right after that, he hit another crossover 3 one-on-one against Alperen Şengün. And he didn't take as many attempts. He only took five shots from 3, so he made 2 of 5 threes. His free throws were very good as well, 7 of 8 from the free throw line. He was able to draw free throws in crunch time, and so he went I think it was 4 of 4, 2 of 2 in crunch time. Also has 7 rebounds, 3 turnovers, and then 3 blocks. 2 of them specifically on Şengün when it looked like Şengün kind of tried to throw his body into Wemby. Wemby didn't let that happen. He absorbed that contact, and then he was able to get 2 blocks on Şengün. And then on another block, Cam Whitmore tried to put up a very high layup against Wemby, and nope, he swatted it before it could hit the backboard. So again, Wemby, obviously a rusty game against Dallas, but then he looked much better in that second game against Houston. Next player I want to talk about from the starting lineup is Jeremy Sochan. So against Dallas, he scores 18 points on 11 shots, 5 of 7 from the free throw line, 6 rebounds and 4 turnovers. And then against Houston, 17 points on 14 shots, 5 shot attempts, 12 rebounds, a double-double, 3 assists, 3 turnovers, and 2 steals. So just what I want to say about Sochan is that he's kind of carried over what he was doing in the preseason, where, now that he doesn't have to be the starting point guard for this team, like the Spurs had him have that role last year to begin the season. He's just more comfortable playing his more natural role of power forward, more so as a secondary playmaker, where, maybe the initial set, whatever the Spurs run, it doesn't really happen. So then he takes over the secondary action, whether he's cutting off the ball, maybe he sets a pick and rolls and scores at the rim. Maybe there was a good play against Houston where he set a pick, he rolls, and he gets Fred VanVleet on him under the rim. Zach Collins sees that, and so Zach Collins throws him a nice high-low, and he finishes the layup. He's scoring out on the break. So again, Sochan's really making the most of his opportunity of staying near the rim and getting very efficient shots where a lot of his points are coming from the paint, and that's a very efficient area to shoot from. Obviously, defenses are still testing his 3-point shot, especially Dallas did that, a lot, where Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively, they would be guarding Sochan, and they leave him completely wide open from 3, and that would give a second body in the paint to Wemby. So that's obviously going to be a work in progress for him. But again, he's making the most of his opportunity in terms of like staying in the dunker spot or just cutting off ball, crashing the offensive glass. He's just doing a lot of things like that. And then defensively, of course, he's really good, where he's almost like I wrote about him, I called him like a Swiss Army knife, where he can play, out of the perimeter, inside. He's able to switch different positions and get, anticipate for steals. He did a lot of that. And we saw, his versatility defensively, where against Dallas, his primary matchup was Luka. And obviously Luka had, does what he does to everyone. So Luka just, it's hard to stop Luka. But then against Houston, he was more so playing more of the bigs, and he was able to switch. And even, like I said, Coach Pop, in those final few minutes when that guard-to-guard pick and roll, one of the things he did was he actually put Sochan on Jalen Green. So again, that just shows his versatility out there, and he's already off to a good start here. Just 2 games of the season. Again, just being more effective out there, especially offensively, even though, he's not one of the go-to scorers, he's able to just rack up points, especially in the paint, just by just kind of being an outlet where players can pass out to him once they kind of draw on 2 defenders. And then one thing I wanted to say about his free throw form, because did I write on his free throws? Yeah. So he goes 5 of 7 from the free throw line against Dallas, and then I didn't write down the one against Houston. I don't even know if he went to the line. Anyway, what's important there is that he did go back to the one-handed free throw form. So we did see in the preseason he was shooting with two hands. Now he's back to that one-handed free throw form. Before shoot around of one of the games, he had mentioned that he went back to the one-handed form just because he said overall when it's game time, he just felt more comfortable with that form. And he says that according to the data that he's seen, he shoots about 80% as a one-handed free throw shooter. So he did go back to that, and that looks like that's the area where he's going to stay with the one-handed free throw. All right, let's see who I'm going to talk about next from the starting lineup. Again, I don't know because I'm mixing up these cards here. Let's see. Here we go. All right, Harrison Barnes. Okay, so Barnes has played about 28 minutes as a starter. He's starting at the wing there on the small forward position. So against Dallas, he scores 17 points on 10 shot attempts, 2 of 5 from three-point range, and 4 rebounds. And then against Houston, he ends up with 11 points on 6 shot attempts, and 2 of 3 from 3 as well, and 3 rebounds. So just what I'll say about Barnes is that, if you watched him the preseason, you did see that, he was struggling a bit with his shot, but he specifically said he wasn't paying attention to preseason numbers at all. Like, he kind of knew once the season starts what to expect. And so he didn't really want to look at that data or just talk about his shooting in the preseason at all. And sure enough, look at that. He's been pretty efficient to start the year already with at least 2 games in, where he's scoring double figures over both games. I would just say about Barnes, you just see kind of what he did with the Kings the last few years, where he's more so on offense. He's a read and react player where he's going to, he's not going to deliberately where the Spurs give him the ball and say, hey, go get us some points. He's going to kind of be a secondary playmaker similar to Sochan, where he kind of reads, what is the defense doing? If there's an advantage, he'll drive in against his defender. He gets out on the break. He's showing that quick fire 3, and he's made, again, 4 of his 8 threes already to start the year. And so that's something that he's ready to do. If the shot's there, he's going to put it up. But again, Barnes isn't one of those players. I wouldn't say he's a high volume 3-point shooter just because he doesn't force it as much. Maybe not as much as try to specifically seek out that shot. Maybe like a player like Julian Champagnie or Devin Vassell does. Barnes doesn't do that. He kind of plays within the offense. He waits to see if there's a good shot there. If the 3's there, he's going to take it. But again, so again, that's kind of what you've seen from Barnes. And then of course defensively, he's out there, able to play on the wing. I think that it showed his presence as well in that second quarter against the Rockets when he was kind of just able to switch, whether out on the perimeter or interior. And so he was part of that group that held Houston to 10 points in the second quarter. So Barnes is off to a pretty good start here as well to start through 2 games. Next player, let's see, Chris Paul. Okay, so Chris is the starting point guard for the Spurs. He's averaging about 28 minutes in 2 games. So against Dallas, he ends up with 3 points on 6 shot attempts, goes 1 of 4 from the 3-point line, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, and 2 turnovers. And then against Houston, he ends up with 3 points on 3 shot attempts, 9 assists, and 4 turnovers. So right now, early on, we are seeing that, again, he's not really trying to be as aggressive offensively in terms of trying to score the basketball. And that was something we also saw with the Warriors last year. So what he's trying to do is more so run the offense, kind of get the players good shots, especially trying to make that connection. Wemby, he got 1 alley-oop against Dallas with Wemby, and then he got 2 against Houston. One thing you see, yeah, so I mentioned his shot. What else did I want to say? I guess that kind of tells the picture about that Dallas game, the rebounding, how difficult it was for the Spurs. The fact that Chris Paul was one of their leading rebounders with 7 rebounds. I would just say, like, offensively, again, there's like some pluses and minuses. Where offensively, the Spurs want him out on the floor. He's gonna find shooters out there, cutters. He's finding all the players out there. And then of course in crunch time, we saw that he is able to kind of direct the offense and also, calm things down. Again, had that really good pass to Sochan with 8 seconds left on the shot clock. But then there's also a takeaway on the defensive end. We do know that he's closer to almost 40 years old. And so, we saw that the Rockets in that fourth quarter in crunch time, they were specifically trying to get him to guard Green. That way he can kind of drive by. And so again, that's a part where, there are some goods, some positives and some negatives to having Chris Paul, at this stage of his career going into year 20 on the team. But that's kind of what he's out there more so is what we're seeing through at least 2 games. Again, it's very early in the season, is trying to set up his teammates and kind of get them going and kind of be that leader on the floor, always talking to the players, kind of, just instructing them, being kind of a coach out there alongside Pop out on the floor is Chris Paul. All right, last starter here I have is Julian Champagnie. So he's averaging about 26 minutes through 2 games. We do know that he's the starting shooting guard until Devin Vassell returns. And then of course, once Vassell eventually gets healthy, we'll see what Coach Pop does with the starting lineup. So against Dallas, he ends up with 18 points on 12 shot attempts. He goes 4 of 8 from 3-point range. So again, a very high volume shooter is Champagnie. 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 turnovers, and 2 blocks. And then against Houston, he ends up with 12 points on 8 shots, and he goes 2 of 4 from the free throw line and 6 rebounds. So Champagnie, again, he's hustling out there on defense. He's trying to stay with his opponents as best as possible. Trying to communicate with the team, trying to switch and rotate, things like that. And then offensively against Dallas, we saw that he's definitely one of the high volume 3-point shooters. Against Houston, the Rockets were deliberately trying to run him off the 3-point line, because that's one thing he's got to get ready for. If he's going to be the Spurs' starting shooting guard for now, teams are going to start scouting him a lot more effectively, and they're going to try to run him off the line. And so we saw the Rockets do that a bunch of times where, he didn't really get any wide open looks. A lot of them were pretty contested. And so he had to put the ball on the floor. And one time he did try to dunk on Alperen Şengün. He got fouled. And so that's something that he's going to have to adjust to, is that, defenses are going to now know his name. They're going to know what he does out there. Maybe they weren't doing that in the preseason, but again, he's keeping that confidence up where he's taking those shots if they're there for him. One thing I did want to say about the starters is in the first crunch time game against Houston, we saw Wemby, we saw Chris Paul, who was it, Sochan? Yeah, so those were 3 of the players in crunch time. Harrison Barnes did come in for crunch time, but it wasn't until it became like a point where Houston had to foul the Spurs, and so the Spurs had Barnes come in on offense on those possessions, so that since he's a better free throw shooter than Sochan. And so that was something to mention, is that Champagnie and Barnes weren't really part of the crunch time lineup until it became a foul situation for Barnes. Okay, so that kind of just goes. That's just a quick little overview of how the starters have done. I just want to share some thoughts through 2 games, not dive too much into data, just because it is only 2 games. Now let's go to the bench. So again, I have one player on the bench that I specifically want to talk about, and then from there I'll kind of mix in all the players and talk about whoever I pull up the next card is who I talk about. So the player I do want to mention is rookie Stephon Castle. So far through 2 games, he's averaging about 22.5 minutes, so 23.5 minutes, or 23 minutes. Against Dallas, he ends up with 8 points on 7 shot attempts, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 turnovers. And then against Houston, he ends up with 8 points on 8 shot attempts. He goes 4 of 6 from the free throw line, including in crunch time, 3 of 4 from the free throw line. So again, the rookie is getting put into crunch time here, and he's actually stepping up. He's not being shy. He's going toward the ball, and if the Rockets foul him, they foul him, and he's stepping up to the line. He also had 3 assists and 3 turnovers against Houston in that game. So what I want to say about him is that defensively, we already saw in that first game against Dallas, something I anticipated that I wrote about was that I thought for sure he would get some minutes guarding Kyrie Irving, and sure enough, he did get his chance at guarding Kyrie Irving. But then even more surprising was that Coach Pop actually had him guarding Luka multiple times as well. And so there was some give and take where some possessions he was able to body up Luka and kind of stay with him a little bit, but then other possessions, of course, Luka can do this to anyone, where he can kind of get away and draw fouls and make shots against any defender out there in the league. That's why he's one of the favorites to be MVP this year. So again, Castle got a shot this in that first game, at least, of guarding some elite players on the offensive end. And then against Houston, what I really want to fast forward to is the fact that the Spurs needed him in the game in crunch time. I mean, they had to have him on the game because of his on-ball defense. And so that he said that's a credit to his defense after the game. The fact that that this team with some veterans and some players who have been on the team for multiple years, they already had him in the final 5 minutes. And again, it's because of his on-ball defense that he's known for. And again, it was major respect to him, the fact that the Rockets were trying to do anything they could to get him off guarding Jalen Green. I mean, that just shows that he, amongst other organizations, I mean, he's already making an impact in terms of how they're scouting him and knowing that, wow, like in the final few minutes of these games, he's already absorbing, he's already known for his defense out there, making it tough on the opponent. And so I would just say too, like defensively, he's already showing major strides out there, anticipating getting some steals, getting involved, doing a great job absorbing contact. And then offensively, he's kind of where, again, he's going to be known for his his outside shots going to have to be a development for him, where it's not really a shot that defenses are going to pay attention, that are going to guard as seriously. So again, his offense will kind of come along. One thing he's been doing a pretty good job of is when he drives the ball. He had a crafty layup where he kind of faked a pass to I think it was Sochan on a pick and roll, and then he ends up finishing the layup. So again, through 2 games, I mean, Castle's getting minutes, and again, he's one of the Spurs' best on-ball defenders. So the Spurs need to have him out there in those final few minutes of a game. All right, so now I'm going to continue with the bench, with the rotation, the second unit. And so let's see who I draw here on this first card. It is Blake Wesley. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on Wesley in Dallas. So he's averaging 7.5 minutes so far through 2 games. So in Dallas, yes, he was part of the 10-man rotation, but he only played 3 minutes in the first half. Then when the game was pretty much a blowout at a 21-point lead for Dallas, that's when Coach Pop kind of let him play out the rest of the fourth quarter. So again, I won't spend too much time on his play in Dallas. But against Houston, he got more minutes because the Spurs did have an injury that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit whenever I get to the card regarding Tre Jones. So against Houston, he got more minutes. He ends up scoring 2 points on 3 shots. Again, you're not looking for a lot of offense from Wesley, and then 1 rebound and 2 assists. I would just say that his energy, his hustle is kind of what he's doing out there. He may not come up with the steal, but he's getting, he's providing that all ball defense, that kind of energy. So again, he's going to get minutes here while Tre Jones is out for a few weeks. So he was, he's been a player who's been getting some minutes there off the bench is Blake Wesley. The next player, let's see who I draw here, is Tre Jones. Look at that right there. Okay, so Jones played about 16 minutes in the opening tip off. Then he actually got hurt though. The team announced, so he's actually has a right ankle sprain that he's dealing with. And so Coach Pop before the Houston game, he basically said that Tre's expected to be out. He said a few weeks, but he said he hopes it's maybe just 2 weeks at minimum. So again, the Spurs are going to be without Tre Jones for about 2 weeks most likely. And so what this means is Wesley, Castle, and now even Malachi Branham, those 3 players are going to have a shot to get more minutes in the backcourt. And so that's what's that's where I wanted to go with regarding Tre Jones, his injury situation. And so we know that in that Dallas game he was the backup point guard to Chris Paul. So that'll be his role this season. It looks like whenever he does get healthy and he returns to the lineup. Next player from the bench unit, let's talk about Malachi Branham. Okay, so Branham wasn't part of the 10-man rotation against Dallas. His only minutes came in garbage time once the Spurs were down by 21 points. So again, I won't focus too much there, but I want to talk about his play in the Houston game. He was a lot more effective on both ends. So he ends up scoring 7 points on 5 shot attempts. He collects 3 rebounds hustling on the glass, 2 assists to 2 turnovers, and then 2 blocks. And so one of those assists I want to talk about is a play where Castle got a steal. He throws a one-handed bounce pass to Malachi Branham out on the break. Branham takes 1 dribble and then throws a 2-handed dish to Keldon Johnson in the air, and Johnson slams home the alley-oop. So again, that was a pretty good pass by Castle, the kind of pass that he made. That's a very difficult pass, a one-handed bounce pass on the move. But then Branham too, his pass too is 2-handed pass to Keldon in the air, and then also his defense. Again, like I said, he was hustling out there. 2 blocks for him. And again, that's an area that he said he worked on in the summer. We didn't see as much of it maybe in the preseason in the minutes he was out there, but he showed at least in this game he was hustling, getting some boards, and then 2 blocks. And then I would also say on the offensive end, just a lot faster in terms of his decision making. He's not really holding onto the ball too much. He's just attacking, whether he's going inside and getting against mid ranger or shooting a 3. So again, that's kind of what we saw from Branham. And like I said, he's gonna need him because he wasn't in the 10-man rotation against Dallas. He's gonna need to make the most of his minutes right now while Tre Jones is out, to show that whenever Jones does get healthy and Vassell, he's still deserving of minutes out there. Is Malachi Branham. Next player. Let's see. We're down to 2 cards here. Keldon Johnson. Okay, so Keldon's averaging about 27 minutes through 2 games. Against Dallas, had a pretty rough night here, 7 points on 9 shot attempts, 4 rebounds, 2 assists to 2 turnovers. And then against Houston, much better game, 16 points on 11 shot attempts and 5 of 6 from the free throw line, including 2 of 2 in crunch time from the free throw line, as well as crashing the boards with 8 rebounds. So what I want to say about Keldon is that he's back to a similar role as last season, where he's coming off the bench, and he's more so like one of those go-to players that the team's going to rely on for his scoring off the bench. And one thing we see with him is that he's going to be a player who mostly kind of similar to Barnes and similar to who else did I mention out there? Sochan, like kind of like a secondary playmaker where, the team's not just going to say, hey, Keldon, run a pick and roll and go score, here, or get to the, create for someone else. He's more so going to read and that's what he did a great job against Houston, where if he sees that his defender's not in their proper stance and he has the advantage, he's going to kind of burst by that player and try to get to the rim. And of course, when he gets near the paint, he's trying to seek contact all the time to get to the free throw line and try to make his layups or his dunks. And so that's kind of the role that you see for Keldon out there. 3-point shot, again, he's more so he'll take the 3 if he's absolutely wide open, but right now early on through 2 games we do see that defenses are leaving him wide open. They're still going to test him on his 3-point shot, and so we'll see how much of that shot he did improve. And so that's kind of Keldon where he's at. And so again, it'll be more so for him about how quickly is he able to kind of read the defense and just react and try to get near the paint and try to get his his layups and his dunk attempts. And the final player off the bench is Zach Collins. So he's averaging about 15.7 minutes through 2 games. So against Dallas, he ends up with 5 points on 3 shot attempts and 5 rebounds. And then against Houston, 4 points on 4 shots 8 rebounds and 2 assists. I do want to give credit to him, defensively against Houston, where he did a great job, especially in that second quarter, where Pop had him mainly hedging out on those pick and rolls, those high pick and rolls. So he did a great job of hustling, where he hedged out, kind of put an arm out there against the ball handler against Houston, then kind of ran back real fast to recover onto the big. And so Collins did a pretty good job there, stepping up, contesting some different mid-range looks from the Rockets players. Again, the Dallas game isn't as fresh in my memory. I watched more of the Houston tape recently. But again, for him, he's got to stay impactful out there, because like I said before in prior episodes here, is that, the Spurs, Mamu's really not in the rotation we see already, but they know that, offensively, if they need a spark, they need some spacing out on the offensive end. Mamu is a player that they can go to. And so early on, at least Zach's made the most of, again, finding cutters, with his different passing, whether he's at the elbow or up top, like he found Sochan on that high-low, or like I said, he played a pretty good defensive game against Houston. But again, we'll kind of see. It's only been a 2-game sample size. So that wraps up this episode of the Spotted Pod. So the Spurs, again, they're 1-1 to begin the season, and we will now see now we're in the grind of the season, where almost every other day there's a game. Actually, the Spurs have a back-to-back already this week against OKC and Utah. So again, we'll see how they do, and I will catch up with you all next week. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.